webinar series in the context of the lockdown and all the restrictive measures linked to the virus, which I probably say it every time, is hopefully coming to the end, but now it's really the case. So I just want a confirmation from my colleagues, Lenke and Veronica, and perhaps from all of you that you can see me properly. It's a little bit of a strange format today because we'll be doing a live webinar clinic or a live CV and cover letter clinic, which is a strange American term to say that we are going to be analyzing the CVs and cover letters. I'll be doing most of the job, but perhaps your comments will also be of interest to others. Now, given the nature of screen sharing, it might be a little difficult for me to follow anything about the chat. So make sure that that the interaction happens perhaps between you and with our technical team. And I may not necessarily be watching the live conversation, but they will be passing on all the information I need to know. And I'll be answering questions and perhaps reading out some comments that my colleagues will pass on to me. So this is András Baneth from Brussels, or more specifically in Waterloo. And you probably met me virtually or perhaps in person at one point. And why don't you type into the chat box a few, not a few words, but basically where you are dialing in from, as we always do at the beginning. So type the city or perhaps a country where you're dialing in from. I see Barcelona and Brussels, Madrid, Warsaw, all over Europe, and perhaps even beyond. We usually do our little contest, who's dialing in from the most afar. And so far, that might be Greece, at least most afar from Belgium. I think it's only question of reference, maybe Bulgaria, Sofia. Very good. So that's great. So everything should be working properly. And as I said, today we'll be looking at CVs and cover letters that some of you have sent in. Now, we got a lot of submissions, and certainly it won't be enough time to go through all of them. So I picked quite a few, around 10 or 12, both from cover letters and from CVs. I'll give you live feedback. I did look at those, but I didn't prepare any notes. So I'll be giving my ideas and my impressions as we go along. So it's really a very natural way how I would process the information as an employer or as someone who professionally reviews these cover letters and CVs. Now, with my background, you might know, so I've been in EU affairs for 15, perhaps even more years. So I've seen quite a few CVs, cover letters. I've employed quite a few people and hired them based on their applications. So I give you that perspective. I've spoken to a lot of other hiring managers, HR officers, and similar roles who also gave their perspective on what do they look at when they hire somebody, what do they consider when they read a cover letter. And there are quite a few success stories that after we have reworked CVs and cover letters, someone who didn't really get any interviews or didn't get interviews for the jobs that the level that they wanted, by reworking these and passing a different message, they got invited and eventually landed a job. So that's a great validation of the power of crafting the right words and presenting the right message. So I'll turn off my camera at this point. Make sure that you can focus on whatever is on the screen and not the beautiful pictures behind me and my headset. So we'll make sure that we truly delve deep into those CVs and cover letters. Obviously, the point here is that you will find information and you will hear things that are relevant and helpful to you. It's obviously helpful to the people whose CV or cover letter I'll be reviewing, but really the point is, and the reason why we're doing it as an open webinar with all of you participating, it's really the point that I'll try to give you ideas and tips which you can immediately apply for your CV or your cover letter. Now, many of these principles I'll be sharing, I may have covered in the previous session. So if you did not participate in that one, I encourage you to do so. So there are a lot of ideas there, very concrete tips, many of which will come back in today's review, and perhaps some others as well, which we didn't cover last time. On top of that, why don't you give your feedback and your comments into the chat box? As I said, I won't be monitoring it in today's live session, but give those ideas so others can exchange views about that and others can learn. And the caveat is really, I am not the ultimate authority on CVs and cover letters. I give you lots of hopefully good ideas, but feel free to disagree. Feel free to say, well, I have a different opinion, or if it's your CV, you may want to do exactly the same thing as before because you just simply have a different opinion. So this is my legal disclaimer. So let's get into it. I'll turn off the camera and we'll get started. Just let me make sure that we have our little logo, not just the AB, and then I'll look at the first cover letters and CVs. I think I will start with CVs, but let's see how my screen sharing is actually going to work out and find the best way possible. So I'll switch over to the Acrobat Reader. I'll close my browser and I get into this. So live screen sharing is always fun with its inherent dangers. So with this, let's try this very first CV. So as you can see, this is a Europass CV. And well, you probably heard me in the previous webinar or on other occasions. I'm not a big fan of the Europass CV. It's really a non-user-friendly format, which doesn't really help neither the recruiter nor the applicant. So it's a very long format and only use it. This is my general advice. Only use it if you must, when the employer specifically asks you to use this particular format. So in this case, you can see immediately that it's 3 pages, which is to my taste too long. It should be 2 pages, and already a lot of white space up there with just technical information. But let's look at more substantive issues. It's too many bullet points, first of all, in my view. And let me a little bit change the view size. Too many bullet points for a given entry. So I don't think you would need 4 or 5, especially if you have a lot of information to share. So it's rather, I would just limit the number, and each bullet point would have probably 2 lines. And then in terms of the job profile, you may want to put here the exact title that you had in that position, or maybe you want to be more descriptive or more helpful to the employer to say, what did that actually include? So being a communications and events representative, yes, but what did that really mean? And you can give more details and more specific information, but every employer will want to know, what was your level of seniority? How many people did you work with? What responsibilities did you have? And especially in the US, they love that approach. And I think it's pretty applicable in Europe as well. Talk about your achievements. So try to add some information about what you achieved. So if I look at this particular person, it says, I organize events, meetings, sponsorship, expositions in Italy and abroad. I'll try to highlight it here. Hopefully you can see the highlight. So, well, it's fine that this is more process driven. So the person describes what they do day to day, but where is the actual achievement there? I have organized 15 events, or I managed to put together a 3,000 person exposition with 400 exhibitors and a budget of 2 million euros. So that thing gives me an impression about the scale and the seriousness of the job or the position at which this person works. Again, main task, okay, management up-to-date CRM system. This could also be perhaps in the skills or the knowledge part that they know social media marketing and CRM. But then again, with social media, the person could say, I create 5 pieces of content each week. I update the company has 10,000 followers. Just give me a scale. Is it really just putting out information nobody reads, or there's a true engagement there? And me as a potential employer, I would say, oh, okay, this is a pretty impressive level, and the person actually knows what they are doing. Another thing that came to mind as I was looking at it for the first time, you can see here the dates. You can see from 2013 to present. And then in between, there is this part which actually starts after and before. You see that it's 2014, 2017. So it makes me wonder, how do these two jobs compare to each other? And even below that, you can see from 2004 to present, freelance translator and interpreter. So why they are doing those jobs, they do those freelance translation and interpreting jobs as well, which could be legitimate, of course. You want to earn some extra money, or there's some free time that this person could use. But I'm wondering, how do these compare to each other? And the number, okay, I probably said it a few times, what's the number one mistake? So one of the core mistakes that many candidates do is they make employers wonder. So if I'm an employer and I look at this, I start wondering, and wondering is not good. You want to give information, spoon feed information to the employers, and just somehow upfront address this question. Whether that might be in the cover letter, it might be in another form, or perhaps here in the CV, but just to say that, okay, why did you work in parallel with these jobs, or how do they compare to each other? Or was it part of the other job, or you were just a freelancer who did many projects at the same time? So this is the kind of explanation that I would suggest this person does. And again, when it comes to all the language knowledge, I'm utterly and totally lost. I understand that here's a little explanation of what the language levels are: basic user and independent and proficient. But again, I really discourage you from using this in any other place than the Europass. So if it's a classic CV format and you use these numbers, letters, it's not really going to work, because nobody really knows what these mean. And another thing, when it comes to skills, it's a pretty common thing where you might say public speaking skills, fine, but try to substantiate it. That I gave, again, try to bring in a number, 50 presentations in the past 2 years, or I regularly brief my executive team on so and so, or I'm part of Toastmasters, which is an international club to improve your public speaking skills. Writing and editing skills, you could put a link here with a collection of all your writing that is publicly available. You can put it on a Google Drive, you can put it in an online sheet. If you have a website, you put it there, or your LinkedIn, whatever it may be. Try to substantiate it, because the skill part generally is quite overlooked by candidates, but it's much loved by employers. They want to know which skills you have, which I would get an idea if I look at this part. Social media, great. CRM, great. But again, don't make me wonder. Spoon feed that information to me as an employer and say, well, I have writing and editing skills because, or here's a link to all the things that I've published online to prove it. And this brings me to another point where you basically claim a lot of things in your CV. And that's fine, because that's what CV is about. But every employer will have some level of doubt how accurate that is. Nobody will accuse you of lying, but we will say, okay, are you a little bit coloring? Are you a little bit making it more shiny than it actually is? And if you can substantiate it, you can prove that. And in the world of online communication, you can do a lot. That's great, because there is this external validation of your claims. And you can link it. You can put, for public speaking skills, you can do a little video, even if you don't publish it, just for those with the link, you can publish it. And immediately I can see that you are able to give a presentation if that's an important part of the job. So let me close this one, move on to the next one. Here's another one. I really like the name, Average Joe. Very, very anonymized and confidential. But the CV itself is interesting. So the next one here, just as a very first glance, if I look at the layout, I like it a lot. It seems pretty organized. It's a nice layout with the font size. Here's company A, here's the dates, the location, this sort of stuff. it seems well organized and relatively clean, though I have some issues, which I'll come back to in a second. Certainly, it starts with work experience, and I highly encourage you to do that. Do not start with education. That gives a very different impression. It seems you are still in school. But if you start with work experience, even if that's about internships or summer jobs, that's okay. Consider that work experience. And then education in the end, and then skills and interest. Very similarly, it's a one pager. I think, again, let me give you a secret. If I look at the CV, and one thing struck at me, the very final two words, Monty Python, this person is a fan of Monty Python, I have the halo effect. Halo effect is that you become biased towards a person based on some characteristics which are not necessarily related to the job itself. So often that's a negative bias, that if a good-looking person comes in, employers would be biased because of that. But in this case, I'm a big fan of Monty Python, so I see that, and immediately that changes my perception of this person, regardless of everything else. So this person starts with a plus point or a positive point in my eyes, without doing anything else than listing Monty Python. You see, so I'm giving away this information because you see that employers, they are legally obliged to non-discriminate, but they are humans. So if you get that sort of resonance with someone, which of course in most cases you cannot know what that is, but if you get that resonance, that can bear positively on your application, provided everything else checks out. So if this person doesn't speak Spanish, and in the job that I'm recruiting for, I desperately need Spanish, they can love Monty Python as much as I do, but that's not going to make or break the application. Good. So work experience, and what issue would I see with this? It's again, it's a little vague. That's another mistake that many candidates do. They are using a lot of vague words and descriptions and not specific enough. So if you say, I oversee the execution of high quality audit engagements, build high performing teams. Really, what is a high performing team? In the business world, there's just so much jargon and there's so much inflated language that ultimately it becomes meaningless. So if you're really into the subject, I encourage you to read books like my all-time favorite called Made to Stick. Fantastic one. Books about clear writing and how to avoid business jargon. There are lots of great articles on the net as well. The Financial Times used to run a column making fun of corporate jargon and corporate BS. So be very careful with those terms because they are not really conveying meaningful information. So what I say here is, as a coach to others, I focus on people, developing talent, and impacting others by identifying their needs. Good, but this is very, very vague. What is exactly that you do? I coach 3 of my colleagues in the past business year, so their performance can double, or so that their interpersonal skills will improve and they can network better. Something. Give me some information because I really don't know what it means. If I'm an employer who really understands coaching, I might have a very different impression on this particular line than someone who has no idea what coaching is. This is the problem with vague language, that it translates into something else in the eyes of the recipient. So what else to say here? Yes, actually one more thing. It's pretty interesting / important what the job title you held is or was. What I mean by that, if you list everywhere that you were a trainee in all these 3 jobs, for instance, this is not the case in this CV, but I'm just saying as a general remark. If I say that you were trainee, and I'm hiring for a manager, I say, this person might be too junior. But if you say for the last job, as long as you're really ethical and you are not cheating with the words or anything else, but you can do it in the CV, and say instead of trainee, you're a junior manager, or you were I don't know if there's such a thing as senior intern, but something that indicates that you were progressing in your career, that can give a very different impression for an employer to say, okay, this person has already progressed to that that I can hire them. So the job title and overall impression also influences the employer at which level they can hire you. That's exactly the kind of case I had some years ago when somebody came to me saying, well, I just don't get a job which is not an internship or traineeship or a very, very junior position. And I don't know why. I've had, I don't know, already 2 or 3 years of work experience. Yes, I did a lot of internships, but I'm ready to go to the next stage. And we looked at her CV, and it really gave the impression that she's very, very junior. And despite the years or the numbers kind of adding up, the way she presented her experience was really that she's at a very early stage of her career. So the impression she gave based on the words, the job description, and everything else from her previous jobs really, what is the word I'm looking for? Really misrepresented her abilities. And the minute we reframe that, again, staying within the ethical boundaries, but the minute we reframe that and presented her as someone who progressed and ready for a more responsible role, I think it was within 3 weeks, she sent me an email that, oh my God, I got a job with a consultancy and this is the kind of job I want. So it was a very, very interesting experience for me as well, how powerful the words are in representing your abilities and your knowledge. Right, let's go to the next one. So this is a very nicely laid out CV. As you can see, it's a copywriter and localization specialist. And I think it's a she, and for some reason, something popped up for a second, but hopefully that still keeps her privacy as we wish to keep that for everyone. So in her case, it's really the overall message is good. It's a good branding exercise where this person puts a typewriter, there's a bit of style to it. Generally, I have mixed views on very creative CVs, but again, it really depends on the kind of job you are applying for. So if this person is a freelancer and really on copywriting, which is a creative job, this fits the bill. So this really fits the kind of profile and the kind of message she's trying to convey, because the overall layout reinforces that positioning. If this was about, say, researching or a lab assistant, or for an EU job dealing with project funding, it may be a little on the edge in terms of its visual layout and the creativity. So that is why it's hard to give any general advice what is the right way. But in this case, it's still it helps the purpose of her application. And then overall, you can see that it's quite a detailed description of what exactly each job entailed. And other than that, I think it's a pretty positive, it's a pretty good example of a CV. It's a one-pager. Interesting. You can see how much you can do on a single page. And this person has 6 years of work experience, so there's quite a lot of information to share. But you see on the left side, education is not complicated at all, just saying what studies, which university, no information on thesis or subjects or grades or something like that, because it's probably less relevant for the application. It's more about the specific things that she did since graduating. And it's nice with the languages, with all these dots, though one thing, it's a tiny thing really in terms of design. I was wondering why the dots have different colors, and I understand that they all have the different colors. It made me a little bit wonder which color means what. So I think we're quite used to infographics these days and a lot of data visualization. I would just probably keep the dots, maybe just a different transparency in the color, but the same color, or different something more clear and not change the colors as they go to the right side. But it's really a minor point. It's a nice way of visually representing the languages and the level at which she speaks. Good. Let me stop for a second. I'll let you just look at this particular example on the screen. You could share ideas with each other, what you like or what you don't like. You can start your chat message with a plus or a minus and say what are the good points and the not so good points. Let me shrink it a bit so you can see more of it. Meantime, I'll jump in and answer a few questions that have come in. So, what is the best way to address work gaps, unemployment in CV? How recruiters see such gaps? I think it's perfectly normal to have a gap. It all depends on how long that gap is. So if you were unemployed for 3 months or 5 months, it's pretty normal these days, unfortunately. And that's okay. You could say in between jobs. That's a legitimate thing to say. What I would consider in those periods, now you cannot change your past, but you can certainly shape your future if you get into such situation, is use that time effectively. So don't give the impression that you were not actively looking for a job. You can do an online course, you can do volunteering, you can do some writing, you can do many things despite not having a job. And these days, even if you don't have any revenue, as long as you have a bit of free time and internet connection, there's quite a lot you can do as a meaningful thing during those times. So if you give an explanation that you were unemployed in that period, but you did so and so, that can be a pretty positive thing. If your gap was, say, for 2 years, you probably need to give some explanation. And you can even say for private reasons or family reasons or health reasons. That's perfectly legitimate. We're all humans, but again, don't make the employer wonder. Another question. In which verb tense should we write the CV, past or present? I've seen examples both ways. I've also seen examples both ways. I probably would use past tense, but then again, that's just my personal preference. Or for instance, if you write a profile, so a little pitch like this one, this public affairs manager says enthusiast public affairs communications expert, and so on. So managed a 4.3 million signatures petition. You see, this is both. So it's describing themselves and then managing that petition or managed in the past. I think this is the right way, but overall, I probably would say past tense. Can you give us some ideas for those who are changing their professional path? I probably just keep repeating myself with this sentence, but it's absolutely fine to change your professional path or wanting to change your professional path. But two things come to mind. Don't make the employer wonder. If you go away from this webinar today, you just hear it ringing in your ear for the rest of the day, me repeating this over and over again. But you want to explain to the future employer why you would like to change your career path. That's one. But there's the other one, is that you're able, that you're qualified, that you have relevant experience, that they can trust. Because obviously they will be reluctant or a little afraid that you're not going to do a good job in the new place. Because if my entire background is in European studies and politics and communication, and tomorrow I want to be a brain surgeon, well, I probably won't want to be my own patient if it ever comes to that. So I really need to prove those points that, well, I'm currently pursuing a degree in a university or online or in any other format to learn about this new area. I'm extremely committed to working on it. I'm a big fan, and let me interject this here. I'm a big fan in the persuasion part of anticipating the objection the person might have and addressing it upfront. What do I mean by that? You could say in the cover letter, perhaps, that you might wonder why I would like to go into a field which is so different from my previous studies or my professional background. The reason is blah, 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 blah. So you upfront anticipate what the person will push back on, and you say, here's the reason. And generally it works magic, because an employer would have this legitimate question and they immediately get an answer. They don't need to read between the lines why you might be suitable for that or not. All right, let me see two more questions. Is there a difference between the way we present job-related duties, like bullets, in CVs versus LinkedIn? Perhaps there is some slight difference, because LinkedIn has its own structure and you can put in information in a pretty structured way, but in its own framework, whereas a CV, you basically put there anything and in any format you like. So you can sort of mirror your own LinkedIn format into the CV. That's one way. Or you could do it in a different way. You may not even just list in chronological order the jobs that you did. You may take a very different approach. That's usually for more senior professionals. So if you have 5, 10 or more years of work experience, you could group it according to areas of interest. So let's say if in a new job, project management is a big thing, you say, here's my project management experience, and you pick and choose every relevant experience you had in that area. Or next one on managing budgets. Here is what I did in managing budgets, and there was a summer job, and there was this internship, and there was that freelance job that I did. So that's another approach, and LinkedIn doesn't make it possible because it's more chronological. But again, it's up to you how you do, as long as the two are really consistent with each other. So there shouldn't be any discrepancy or differences. Okay, final question I'll take, and then I'll go on. If you're a trainee and they get hired and progress with the company, do you indicate your highest job title with the total dates in the CV, or you split your work experience based on the time in each position? Quickly processing the question. If I understand correctly, you're asking whether, despite staying with the same company, but you progress in different jobs, would you list each of those stages in your career advancement? I think yes. I probably would put there that, well, I was a trainee, then I did this, then I did that, because probably your job description changed quite a bit. I actually have a friend, she started in a consultancy as an intern, and she went all the way to senior VP. So it's really over many years. So obviously the kind of responsibilities that he had changed over the years, and the kind of policy areas or dossiers or clients he worked with changed over the years. You probably want to detail and not just say, well, I was with this company that number of years and progress from here to there. It's really the more details, because employers want to know what you're capable of, what are your strong and weak points and areas of knowledge. All right. Actually, I'll take one more question, which I quickly glanced here, and I think it's important. Is it better to use first person or impersonal? So to say, I was responsible for, or impersonal saying responsible for. I slightly prefer the second one. So to say that, obviously you have your name, you have all the information. So for instance, like in this one on the screen, and let me get back to this one, where the person says monitored legislation and media. I think that's slightly better. It's more matter of fact instead of saying I monitored, because it's not really a cover letter, but it's indeed a CV where advised. It's more Telegram style that this is what I did. So let's take a look at this one. And as I said, I can see your comments right now. You probably have quite a few of what works and what doesn't. In terms of this little intro, generally it can work nicely. I'm quite neutral on that, whether you should or should not put that. You could. It positions you in one way, as long as it's meaningful. So for instance, highly adaptable strategic thinker. To me, these are such empty words, really, unless you back it up with some information. So you put numbers, figures, facts, brand names, really anything that makes it more concrete will make it more impactful. So this one, for instance, managed a 4.3 million signatures petition. I like that a lot, though I have no idea which petition or which platform or which topic, but the fact that this person dealt with it, and the 4.3 million, it's a big number for signatures, so that's nice. I'm a little wondering about the word managed. Does it mean that this person coordinated it, ran the campaign, was responsible for it, or he or she was the IT manager? Hard to tell. But in terms of more meaningful information, this is quite nice. The skills on the left side, languages, interests, nice. I think it's nice. Again, a little vague for my taste. So project management, okay. Press relations, what does that mean, really? But then it's nice, and the layout is not bad. It's relatively easy to scan and get a first impression on what this person knows and does. The usual comments apply here, I think, with some of these of making it more specific, a little bit shorter, each bullet point, make it even easier to scan. But other than that, this is a fairly good example. Let me take one more, and then we'll transit to the cover letters. Here is one on this one. Okay, so actually Hungary, interesting, and China. So this one is a nice layout, that's for sure. The profile with a good pitch, and I like this pitch because it says, well, PhD candidate, knowledge of Chinese language, seamless communication. Still a tiny bit vague, but the fact that this person speaks Chinese, has a PhD, flexible and patient, I think this gives a nice framing for their profile. Work experience, assistant, research assistant, intern training. So you see, this is a little bit like the one I mentioned before. Despite having a lot of work experience, and you look at this one in 2013, there was probably some summer job, probably another summer job because it's July, September, and then April, October. So quite a bit of work experience. It might be a little difficult for employers to position this person. So a person who's really capable and did a lot of things around the world, especially in China, and yet most of it is internship and then assistant. So it would be hard to fit in the right level in the hierarchy. And then with education is ongoing, so that kind of explains all the rest, language and IT skills. But this is the only thing I would be wondering about. So is this person still studying and wants a full-time job, or did they, at which level would I hire him or her? And I would wonder about that, and going back to my earlier point. Good, let's look at a couple of cover letters as promised before, and let me dissect them. Now, I looked at most of the submissions that came in, and really, if I were a teacher, and the grumpy, strict teacher, which I'm not, but if I were that, I would say, come on, kids, I told you in the previous webinar so many times, don't do this, and yet you still do. Now, I can certainly not expect everyone to have seen the previous session or other presentations I've given or articles we wrote. What is the point I'm so critical about? Well, the point is, pitch the cover letter in a way that immediately presents what you know and how it benefits the employer. Very, very simple principle. And yet, in most, I can say most of the submissions that I saw, this simple principle was not applied. So how does that manifest itself? It typically manifests itself, if I just take a look at this one, in a way that when I just simply read it without truly processing the information, almost every sentence starts with I. A lot of I. My professional experience, my professional progress, working as I strongly believe. Try to avoid this. Try to reframe it in a way that you don't start a sentence with I, but you say, the in-depth research, let's say, the in-depth research I conduct on the 3 pillars of banking union makes me understand the complexities of the banking system, which can contribute to your project on so and so. So I hope you can understand the point where you don't just present and broadcast information. Here's what I did. Here's what I did. I'm pretty good at this. I did that. You need to make sure that the sentence has 2 parts. And what you did is just the beginning, and you immediately connect that to the info, or immediately explain how that can benefit the employer. And that you know pretty much, because you can research the employer, you can find information, you look at their annual report, you look at press information about them, you look at which trade association they are members of, if we're talking about a private company or some other organization. You can look at their positions, you can look at the Joint Transparency Register and see which policies they interact with. There's a lot of information you can find out. You can even call, actually, you can even call the organization itself and say, well, I'm very interested in a job with you. Could you tell me where can I find out more information on this and this? And that can make your application really, really relevant. Because otherwise, it's just shooting with a machine gun, indiscriminately putting out information what you did and hoping that the employer will connect the dots and say, that's actually pretty good for us. That's what we're looking for. No, you need to spoon feed that information. In terms of layout, this is just too busy for me. There's a lot of information and very hard to scan. So I would just cut it into shorter paragraphs, perhaps a few bullet points. And what else should I say? So let me pick apart this part. So my professional progress, independent lawyer, and then in this administration proves my ability, resilience, and capacity to channel multiple tasks into productivity. My issue with a sentence like this is you certainly want to sound confident. That's fine. You want to show your best self. That's fine. And yet, this is not really working towards that goal. So to say my professional progress proves my adaptability, you could say, how can I serve your organization with the great skills that I've gained? So going back to my earlier points. So the way I would rephrase this is, thanks to my adaptability and resilience that I gained as an independent lawyer when working in this and this public administration, I'll be happy to put that to use in your organization. So I hope you understand the difference between these two approaches. This one is saying, hey, I'm great because I gained that experience, and believe me, I am very resilient and adaptable. And the other one says, what I have, my adaptability and resilience, can be really good for you. So it's really just marketing, where I think there's a saying that you don't sell a hammer or a nail, you sell fixing a hole in the wall, something like that, or something with a picture. So you're really looking at the solution, really looking at the results that you want to achieve. And from an employer perspective, well, employers are selfish. They have a certain need. I can say business need, but even in the public sector or in the NGO world, I would say a business need, a specific tangible need that they want to fill, and they want you to do that. So if you apply and say, I'm really able, I speak those languages, I have those skills, yeah, they will wonder, okay, does that fill the need I am looking to hire a person for? You can tell them really upfront that these skills will help you, it will give you less headaches and feel confident that you can hire me. Okay, with this, let's look at another cover letter. So dear hiring manager, unfortunately, I don't know which jobs these cover letters were sent for. Well, reading this one, probably it's some UK issue or perhaps some cultural institute or something similar. But I think here, my first issue would be, it's immediately, again, doing the same mistake where telling the hiring manager about the person's background and relevance. If I really want to be analytical and think deeply about cover letters, and honestly, I didn't think about this before to such degree, so I'm trying to gather my own thoughts on this. But if I really wanted to be that analytical, I would think very carefully, what blocks would a cover letter need to have? By blocks, I mean each paragraph would serve a purpose. The first paragraph is probably about establishing connection. Why are you interested in the job at all? And why did it raise your interest and expression? A bit of a warm-up exercise to establish some connection with the employer. Perhaps a second paragraph would be about relevance, where you want to prove that your profile is actually relevant to the job they are looking to fill. Perhaps the third paragraph would be on trust. How and why should they trust you and the claims that you are making? And then you can talk about certain brands you worked for or organizations, names that resonate. You might talk about your educational background, which might raise some confidence. You can talk about your achievements. There are many ways to go about establishing the trust. And the next one would be perhaps addressing potential pitfalls or questions or problems. So this is the don't make the think part, where you can say, well, you're available to relocate, or you still need to finish your studies and you're available in 4 months, but you're really motivated to do that. Or you might talk about some knowledge gap because they really expect you to speak Swedish and you don't speak Swedish, but you're willing to learn Swedish within 12 months if you are hired. So you address those things up front. What I'm saying is that you can put a lot of awareness into a cover letter of what you want to achieve with each segment and with each section in it. So here, when I said establishing some connection, yes, it might be a good thing to start with why you're interested in UK and British culture, but immediately goes into too many details too soon. This probably would need to go into the second or third paragraph. So BA studies in English and literature, you can say, because of my studies and my deep interest in British culture, since my teenage years, I've done exchange programs, and I was involved at university clubs dealing with this issue. So something that a little bit really like you meet a new person at a cocktail party, you don't immediately start telling them your background and all the details. At one point you might, but first you want to establish connection. And a cover letter is a virtual handshake where you, bit by bit, build up a story of why they should invite you to the interview. And I think there's not enough thinking in a cover letter like this of which detail goes where or how detailed you should be. Okay, let's look at another one. Okay, so it's an interesting one. This is a motivation letter for Comms Advisor. So this is probably a cast competition. Let's start with the very first line. Dear HR responsible. This is a little strange for me. It might be coming from, I don't know, perhaps French or another language where it's a literal translation. But in English, dear HR responsible, it's HR manager, or dear, probably dear HR manager. Might be a good way to start, but HR responsible immediately gives me the impression that this person might speak and write English well, but there is quite a bit of interference from another language. My name is so and so, and I would like to apply for the position of communication advisor. This is a pretty classic way of opening, but I don't think it's the best way to open a cover letter, even if it's a motivation letter, in fact, more than a classic cover letter. I probably would start to think about, again, creating that connection that I talked about earlier, to say, as a communication professional with 10 years of experience or with 3 years of experience, I'm very interested in being hired for the position of communication advisor. So that does two things. Immediately communicates some information about your relevant professional background and shows your motivation. Let me talk a second about motivation. Many candidates just overblow the motivation in their cover letter, that they're extremely motivated to do this, and they think that motivation alone will do the trick. Yes, motivation is important, but it's just one of the many factors that go into a CV or cover letter. So you should emphasize that you're really motivated, but prove each of those points why you qualify. Because most candidates would say that they're motivated, and what is really going to make or break the hiring is the relevance of their profile and meeting all the criteria that are in the job description. This brings me to another point. When you have a detailed vacancy notice or a detailed job description, You might choose the idea in the cover letter to address each of those points directly in the cover letter. So if the job description says the following 4 criteria are necessary for applicants, or applicants must fill the following 4 criteria, you could structure your cover letter by putting in as a bold heading or as a bullet point those 4 criteria and give information why and how you filled those criteria. That's a very legitimate way, because immediately the hiring manager will say, oh, these 4 points are really important to me, and this candidate just ticks all the boxes. That's pretty good. It's not that they need to analyze and bring in an artificial intelligence software to decode the cover letter and say, in paragraph 4, there is a reference to this particular software, and paragraph 3, they said they worked 4 years at this place. It seems they check all the boxes. So you really structure the information in a way that the recipient will process it. So with that, let's look at this one. I hold an MSc Agriculture and Wildlife Management, acquired relevant work experience, environmental field, did a traineeship. Again, it's too much broadcasting. It's too much saying, here's what I did, here's what I did, and not really packaging the information from the recipient's perspective. And it's too long. It's really, really too long, because even if it's a page and a half, it's just very hard to skim. It's very hard to look at. You could use more bullet points. Just really the visual structure of the cover letter could be far, far better, even if it's a motivation letter for a communication post. All right, what else? I see we have 5 or so minutes left, but let me take a look at some others. So again, the start. Having read your vacancy notice, I'm pleased to announce that both my experience as a political analyst and international relations allowed me to make a useful contribution. I love the expression useful contribution. What I don't like is to say, I'm pleased to announce. This is not really a broadcast at Charles de Gaulle Airport. We are not pleased to announce, or this is not an award. This is not the Oscars where they say we're pleased to announce this year's winner. It's, I'm really motivated to apply, or I was very positively. I'm just trying to find the right words. I was positively impressed by the vacancy notice. Because it so much fits my professional interests, ambitions, and my profile. So you see that with this sentence, you would match the connection between your motivation, your background, and then the vacancy was actually the perfect fit for you, so you want to apply. But this structure is not really the best one. And on the other hand, what I said, make a useful contribution, that's exactly what I'm talking about, where this is the service attitude that you want to show in a cover letter. All right. I can see that there are a lot of questions coming in about the greeting. So how do you start the actual cover letter? So to whom it may concern, or dear HR manager, or dear future supervisor. Perhaps try to make it as concrete as you can, because if you really write dear HR manager and we're talking about a 3-person trade association, then if it's a 3-person trade association, well, there's probably not a hiring manager, but it's the secretary general who actually handles all of this. So do a little bit of search or research in terms of who you address it to, and in most cases, this should do the trick. But other than that, this should not be a problem. Okay, what else? How do we establish connection in the first paragraph? So you really see about, you talk about your professional background, your interests, your motivation, but to see that I was very, again, well, like I said before, with my degree in international relations and international cooperation, I was greatly impressed by the vacancy notice the EAS put out there, because this is exactly the kind of job that I have been looking to do, something like that. So where you're not really, it's not an overkill that how motivated you are, but to say I was very positively surprised, or I was very pleased to see that there's a vacancy because it so much matches my professional ambitions and my background. So that's why you establish connection to say, when I saw this, I felt, bingo, this is good for me, and certainly good for you if you hire me. There are many ways to do that. Really, I'm just giving you one idea based on these samples that we've reviewed. But finding the right tone without going too far is really an art, but you can do it because you have time. You can think about it, and you can Google around and saying what's the best opening line in a motivation letter or cover letter. So let's look at a couple of other points here before we finish off, and I can look at one or two questions. Still, it's again describing what this person does instead of linking it to the actual say benefits that the EAS in this particular case might be looking for. So sentences like this: I believe that not only my knowledge, my excellent communication, critical thing, will be a valuable asset. How? This is what's missing here. How? So I would rephrase it and say, based on my communication, analytical, critical thinking, it can be a benefit to the EAS because, or in a way that, or in their project dealing with, or given its clear focus on this and this region of the world. So this is just half the story, and make sure you complete it with the other half. So I think this is where I'll stop for a second, perhaps 1 more minute, to answer some of your questions. I really hope that this was helpful and useful. As I said, this was a little unorthodox format where I was sharing my screen, looking at it, everything live with quite little prepared notes. But I really hope that these comments, these ideas were practical and you can apply it to your own CV and career. So let me look at 1 or 2 questions before I truly finish off. What about putting logo of a company or organization on the CV? Is that a good idea? Well, it depends on how many companies you worked for, but if it's a brand name, then most employers would know, because the assumption is you probably worked in a similar area or in a similar field. Whereas in other areas, I probably wouldn't put logos, just the name of the company. Otherwise, it can get a little too busy. What else? Is it really bad if parts here and there in my CV is copy-paste from sentences inside the vacancy notice? I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't do that. If there are some important keywords that you want to put into your CV because there's a computer or some algorithm doing a pre-screening, looking for those keywords, making sure that there's relevance. It's a huge organization, a consultancy or software company or something, then I would just put those keywords. You can even put a separate section in the very end saying keywords, and then you put those 5-10 keywords if it's those technical terms that must be in. But copy pasting from the notice, I probably wouldn't do that. All right, this is where I'll stop. And truly, truly thank you for your time and your attention. I know there are quite a few other questions that we'll try to come back to in writing. So we'll send out a memo or a note or a Tipcentrics article with the questions I didn't have time to answer. Truly thank you for submitting CVs and cover letters. And as I said, hoping that this was helpful, not just to those whose materials I reviewed, but others as well. And with that, next week is our next, perhaps the final session, where we look at email writing with a lot of similar ideas, but still very new concepts of how to write efficient emails in all sorts of contexts, where you invite someone or somebody criticizes you or you messed up something at work, and how should you respond. And hopefully that will be yet another aspect that will advance your career. So with that, thanks very much to Lenka and Veronica for making this possible, and for everyone else for joining. And hope to see you next week. Thank you.